Welcome to Learn the Sword. Not every day you wear a hakama or a kimono, or you wear a kendogi or traditional Japanese martial arts wear that has been used throughout history for at least 800 years. What I'd like you to understand is not everybody lives in a hakama and kekogi. Therefore, sometimes they wear a jinbei. This is another very, very ancient outfit, basically used for summer. I said it earlier, it's called a jinbei. It's basically a little bit shorter sleeves, long pants or short pants depending, and it's a lot more open. So when you live in a country like Japan where it's an island and they got monsoons and it's 100 degrees with 99% humidity, clothing like this really makes a difference. So remember, if you're practicing in jeans and shorts, fine, so be it. As long as you practice comfortably every day. Because the more you practice, the better you will become in your technique and the more proficient in your transitions and movements, which is very, very important. Speaking about transitions and movements, let's go back to a very important factor called kihon. Kihon is your baseline. It's your foundation. It's your original guideline, because you can establish this 5 basic strike guideline later when we start working on wood or steel. In many of the katas, we can work with the correct timing and rhythm. So not only is kihon important, it is your foundation. So when we go back and forth on video, we can still all stay on the same page. Of course, when you look at the video itself and you see the different aspects of kihon, you see the 5 basic strikes. And of course, you see me lifting up the sword and then cutting down into like a men, for example. Let's take this just a little bit further and let's go over the basics. Remember, no matter what it comes down to, you're cutting with your hips. If you take your hips into the target area with the sword, that means the full weight is behind the blade. But if you extend out a little too far and you're cutting like this, or if your body's too far forward and you're cutting like this, it's fine. But nevertheless, it isn't perfection with posture and correct movement. Therefore, instead of having a wider stance right at this time, almost shore it up where you're almost standing abreast like this, standing full and tall. Maybe bring your right foot forward just a little bit. I mean, just like a half of a foot, for example, and you're basically in a walking stance. The next pace you make would be a walking pace. So only, maybe 10 or 12 inches at a time. When you do this and you don't over exaggerate the stance, that means you can easily transition to and out of the technique area or your target area. What I also like you to understand is it's very important to make sure that you come down all together, the sword, the hips, the whole body. Because if you can start doing that correctly, what's going to happen is later down the road when you're using metal and steel, your posture will be spot on. So let's go back to this. Usually when we bring the sword out for kihon, for a men or a kote or a do, ashi or ski, doesn't really matter which one, but let's stay with men. We lift the sword above your head. Now, usually you try to move forward like this. Most everybody does. They try to push forward and cut down, almost like they were a sprinter doing a 50-yard dash. They get down, put their fingers up, and then all of a sudden they jump out and lurch out like that, which is really, really good. But that isn't sword sparring. That isn't sword sparring. That isn't swordsmanship. When you come at a target like this, it's fine. But if you incorporate gravity into your inanimate object and you push the sword forward, what happens is that you don't telegraph your thoughts or intentions. And that's a very important factor. So if I'm like Jesse Owens, 1936, I get up there and go, rah, and push out like that, you see me telegraphing a mile away. But if I lift up the sword here or in a hostile position, but basically from here, and I lean forward into it, and I fall into it a little bit, you can't see my predetermined pushes and movements because now I'm going with gravity. For example, let me lift the sword up on this angle here like this. Okay, I'm in a nice stance. My feet are very close together. I start leaning forward just a little bit, and then all of a sudden I throw my foot out just like that. And when I throw my foot out, it almost saves me from falling. So say I'm up like this and I start leaning forward until I fall and I throw my leg out. It doesn't look like much, but you just went 16 to 18 inches basically just on that movement. So another aspect I like you to think about is not overextending your posture or your technique. A lot of people want to really reach out there and do that. No, stay within your parameters to begin with. Lift the sword up, cut down like that. Watch it again. I'm at a different angle. I lift it up. I slightly lean forward, just a little bit, listing forward, and I cut down into a cote like that. If you can effectively lean into the target, use gravity with it, start adjusting your sword a little better, you'll find out that you don't have to swing the sword half as much. You don't have to put in half the pressure. All you need to do is see the target, shibori it correctly or ring it correctly, start leaning into the target, and let everything else do it the way it's been done for centuries. Let gravity take over with a little push, and there goes a nice dough. So what I like you to do is practice. So lift up and men, and then bring it back. Lift it up and practice this over and over. Men. See where that ends there. Now you ask, why is this hand parallel? Right at this time in your training for the beginning students, we have to have guidelines and focal points. Because if we don't have guidelines and focal points, all the cuts will be different from each other. That's just the way it is. But if we can start establishing good foundation with good focal and parameters, then we can start understanding where our sword is in our hands and how to manipulate it correctly from A to B.